Welcome to the House of Esor podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me daily, Derek.
I'm not Bozo the Clown.
And Sean.
Thrill me.
And in this episode, we're discussing Night of the Creeps, the 1986 Fred Dekker movie that stars Tom Atkins. And Fred Dekker had collaborated with Shane Black. They had co-wrote the new Predator film. Then Fred Dekker also write Monster Squad?
He had Monster Squad, and he was also attached to some of the Lethal Weapons as well.
So, somebody that had a lot of stuff in the 80s. And two, Night of the Creeps, we'll discuss spoilers throughout because it's a movie from 86. You've probably already seen it.
I don't think if you haven't seen this movie and we tell you anything that happens in it, that when you watch this movie, I don't think it will affect your enjoyment.
So the movie was a huge hit because it grossed $591,000 in theaters. Because it's been more of a movie, it's more of a cult hit.
It only made like $500,000.
That's what it says.
Jeez.
But in
how many theaters they released it to?
I would assume not a lot.
Gosh.
It had a budget of $5 million, didn't it?
Oh my god.
So these are all like reported numbers, and two, you had an era where
somebody was sneaking in and out of the creeps.
The life of a movie on video is much different in the 80s and 90s than it is today. Just because let's see, there's not much on the performance, but it was released in August of 1986. And
well researched.
It was released. It was released across 70 theaters.
That's it.
Yeah, so it was not like a wide release movie, and it got decent reviews and stuff. But
I wonder why they
was it like rated X or something? Because
I wonder what the deal is.
Because there is a lot of gore in it and a ridiculousness. Like there's like typical 80s movies, there's some boobs and there's some gore. And
I wonder if it was a thing too of being like basically a horror comedy that so many people were like, I don't know, but
because the basic synopsis is. Alien brain parasites entering humans through the mouth turn their host into a killing zombie. Some teenagers start to fight against them.
My favorite thing is this movie has a lot going on in it because it starts off, we're in the 50s, we're in black and white, and they threw as many B-movie cliches in this as they could. Mm-hmm. So because you're on like Sorority Row, you're at all the Greek houses, a guy picks a girl up, and as he's waiting for her to come out of the car, the radio comes on talking about like a psycho killer or escaped the mental hospital, which how many urban legends have that in it? Then later on, like in that, the cop comes at the kissing point. He's like, "Hey," and he realizes it's his girlfriend, his ex-girlfriend that he is still in love with, and he tells me you just need to go home.
A lot happens in that opening.
Yeah, that happens in the opening.
Yeah.
And then she gets axe murdered. At the same time, the boyfriend finds the alien slugs that the aliens at the beginning of the movie, which I forgot about that. You start off in a spaceship with these naked aliens running.
Very good movie. Why wasn't that in black and white too? They should have made that in black and white. Yeah.
And then the space slug jumps in his mouth, and then it cuts to modern times. And there's so much that went on in that beginning because you got like the alien ship with the aliens, you got the space slugs getting released, you got the axe murder, you got the boyfriends. Like this movie starts off like with a bunch of different plot threads that never really kind of go anywhere. Yeah,
like the escaped mental patients don't really have anything to do with the rest of the movie.
But again, though. That was just such a cliche.
It's just a tragedy that Tom Atkins,
Yeah, that's his fuel.
It took me a little bit to connect the dots when I was watching. Like, oh, the young cop was Tom Atkins because they do the flashback of like him there in his current state.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a ton done to really to connect the dots there. You had to kind of sit there and think about it. Because a lot of times they go through a great pain to point out to you that, oh, this is the young version of this character. This is the old version of this character. This movie doesn't do that as much. And he has like the dreamers on the beach and stuff.
Which I love that he's on the beach. He's like in the white tuxedo. And they walk over and they give him the coconut. And then like he looks over and sees like his high school sweetheart come out of the water.
And basically they're almost replicating the kind of the sequence from Jaws whenever Brody's like looking up and see, you know what I mean, like they have people every time somebody walks across, like the lens gets longer and stuff, same exact thing. I feel like that was a complete homage to Jaws.
I just like too, like the next scene is him with the in his police uniform with a little flower pinned to him with the shotgun.
Yes,
and then he wakes up, and he's like laying in his house with the Hawaiian shirt on.
So you have like the alien setup, you have the serial killer or the escaped mental patient setup
with the axe,
and then you have the guy that just finds the aliens, and then you cut to 30 years later
on Greek Row, whatever.
Yeah. So and then you have your two lead characters that are
Rusty.
From the Vacations, but not. So you have Chris and JC. So and then like a weird twist. I was thinking about. I was watching it. I was like, I can't think of another movie where JC is the friend that has the crutches. So the friend that has the physical disability is the one who sticks up for the one who doesn't.
Yeah.
Which was kind of like a nice little twist from even back in the 80s that the character on crutch was the one that was being the more alpha character, sticking up for his friend that was getting made fun of or whatever. So it was like a weird kind of twist that, and two, like a part where like one of the douchey jocks, college frat bros, knocks down JC. Like Chris doesn't punch him and start an altercation or anything like a lot of movies do.
Yeah.
Like the women step in, but you have Chris and JC that are girl crazy, and Chris is wanting to talk to some girl.
I think it was an attempt at character growth because by the end of it, he is, holding a flamethrower. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a shotgun.
So I think
that was an attempt of like, hey, look how weak he was in the beginning, and now
the hero's journey.
Yeah, not that he went through a major transformation or anything.
But yeah, so you have them kind of seeing like all the girls and being like, so they decide to pledge for a frat because Chris thinks that'll help them. And they get tasked with going to a laboratory or distill a dead body to place on a rival fraternity.
At the morgue at the university hospital.
So then they go and find the room that has the body from the beginning of the movie, the guy that found the alien slugs initially, and they let his body out of its container.
State.
Then the slugs escape and start the story.
They go into the mouth of the doctor, who that guy's just in a ton of shit. Mm-hmm. I don't know his name, but he's been in a lot of stuff.
We were talking about before. Yeah, he's the bank manager in Drag Me to Hell.
Paymer.
Yeah, he just
David what?
David Paymer.
Yeah.
If you see him, you know who he is. He's like a character actor, I guess.
Yeah.
He's been in so much stuff.
And yes, you have
this film. Small aside. Had me immediately like, oh yeah, cryogenically freezing. Let me look that up because I was fascinated by that as a kid.
Yeah.
What was that Mel Gibson movie, Forever Young? Did you ever watch that? He's like from the 50s and he gets woken up in like the 80s or whatever. And, he was cryogenically frozen. But that had me looking it up, and there was a list of like 8 famous people that are cryogenically frozen.
Even talk about Walt Disney in this.
Yeah, well, he's not. That's why too. I was like, yeah, I'm sure he's not, because that's always. I was like, when did that joke start? Because I heard it in this, and I was like, I didn't realize the joke had started that far back. You know what I mean, or the theory. But there's some people thinking like, oh no, because everybody's frozen pretty much as soon as after they die, that it's going to be like leaps and bounds before they can be woken up. Some people think it's more of a religion than science. Some guy was like, oh, I think within the next, I don't know how many years, 30 years, they'll be able to wake people up. Somebody else said, no, basically everything on the inside is turned to mush by this point.
Yeah. I mean,
but if you got the money, you can you can say to get frozen once you pass away.
Man. Well, and one thing I like too is like, this starts to like, actually the dream sequence is right after this. Then they call Tom Atkins, which he's so great in this movie because he is just scene chewing, and he's just like,
it's funny too. You talk about Fred Decker working on Lethal Weapon. He was in Lethal Weapon 1.
Lethal Weapon. Yeah.
And two, like this movie, because like a lot of times with Tom Atkins, he was playing like a more restrained, like veteran cop role, because he played that a ton. Yeah. And in this one, it's more of the restraints are off a little bit more, and he's kind of able just to kind of go over the top to whatever level he wants.
He's the ultimate dad joke because he's in a Hawaiian shirt. They call him, he's like, this isn't Bozo the Clown or whatever, which I don't know if that joke was ever funny. And then like he shows up and he's like, hey, and he's like, I'm not Bullwinkle. And he just does all these like weird, like naming famous characters, like ripping all the cops. And then like they realize, like, where's the second body at? And, but
the whole film name drops too.
Yeah, then this is one of the movies which we've talked about this either on podcast or off, but there's certain movies where they do like homages to different directors, and like every character in this movie's last name is that of some type of
Cronenberg.
Yeah,
and it mostly works in this only because the tone is so consistently just goofy.
Tongue in cheek.
Yeah, the whole thing is tongue in cheek, and you never like are sad over anybody dying or anything, because the whole tone is
but then they never,
a consistent tone, so it's like whatever.
They never like Cronenberg, and then they keep saying it. They say it like one time, and
they don't make it as cringeworthy as some like modern indie horror does, where everybody's named something Carpenter or Craven or whatever.
Like, it's just kind of like a throwaway line, and you never hear about it again.
And too, like I feel like this is probably one of the earlier films to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the original Halloween, it was Sam Loomis.
Yes, yeah, but like this hard, like you see a lot of indie stuff going this hard, but like
I mean, and to be fair, we've had references on our stuff like that, but I think we kind of decided, or at least I decided, it's like, let's not ever do that again.
But then, like, too, I think maybe this is different when you have like,
it works for that tone.
It works
It works for that tone.
Well, too, like,
and it was new to do the entire basically of supporting characters.
Well, too, like something, Sean, that you had mentioned, I didn't really even think about was how much the movie Slither, the James Gunn movie, kind of pulls from this. Because there's a lot of like space slugs that get in people's brains and control them, like having a bunch of them like in the basement or like a building or whatever. Like there's a lot of elements that really pull pretty hard.
What makes me kind of mad about that though is, and that's where I'm kind of like screw James Gunn, because when he talks about it, he's like, oh no, I didn't pull from this, I pulled from other movies. Like, the entire premise of your damn movie came from this. I went and read a bunch of stuff about it. And he's like, oh no, it came from these other films. And it's like,
I mean, it is possible to, because like,
no, you can't have.
There's stuff that we've made that people
There's
like.
Another slug movie I remember seeing though from, I can't remember if it was the early 90s, but you know what I mean? Like I've seen other slug movies. Now I don't know if I've seen any that were made earlier than this one though. You know what I mean?
But to me, like this one, there's so many similarities.
But I think but the box office performance of all the movies is pretty similar. If you do a horror comedy with some sci-fi elements, you're pretty much doomed to not make much money. Yeah. Just because for whatever reason, like on the convention circuit and like cult status, those movies can be very popular. But in terms of like mainstream box office, like just whatever it is, that combo, like
The World's End made it succeed, but they had built up some cachet then,
and they didn't bill it and sell it as that as much as it was like the next movie from the director of Shaun of the Dead and World's End, or
they didn't come out of nowhere.
I mean, like, there's other, like Gremlins kind of was like a horror comedy, but I mean, there's movies that skirt the line, but they're much more mainstream in appeal.
Can we just talk about how there's a girl that walks in toward the beginning, and this is some foreshadowing. She has like a case of jars of brains.
Yeah.
What is that? It's human brains. Where you can put them. Well, put them in the basement. Like, why are you just walking around? Why would this give you like all these jars of human brains?
Again, it's all tongue in cheek, and the things pulled off in this film, they knew specifically the tone, and they kept walking that line, and they didn't never try to take it too. If they would have veered too seriously on any elements, it would have made everything else seem stupid, or that element seem stupid. Like they walked the line.
If they grounded it too much, it would have ruined the tone, because it was going for a jokey, lighthearted feeling. And I
think starting out with a B movie 50s vibe set everything up.
Because
for that.
We've said like now everybody is enamored and obsessed with the 80s, but in the 80s people still had a lot of affinity for the 50s.
It's again another one of those films.
30-year gap type deals. But like the beginning part was, fun, and then once they get into the meat of it, it does very much fall into the stereotypical, quote unquote normal, like smart nerdy guys, or the non-jock, non-bro guys want to date like the most popular women.
But see, I think that
and
was
then
just...
they don't get it because like the douche bros are keeping them away. But then like through a turn of events, at least one of them is able to win the girl at the end of the day. And that's a trope that really was hammered on big time in the 80s and 90s.
I think that this wasn't,
and it's starting to kind of die off a little.
I don't think this was doing that in a serious light. I think this was like kind of like everything else is kind of tongue in cheek, because like they made the douchey bro guy, like whatever his name was, the leader, like so douchey. Like it was just like they even had like him like blonde, bleach blonde hair, and like it's like so he was so hard on the douche scale that like. And then like there's one part where they go into the actual party before they start to do the pledging, and there's like a guy with a unibrow. The guy on crutches is making fun of him. He doesn't get it. Like, I think they made
They weren't trying to make a John Hughes film where you know what I mean. Like they knew like, oh, these are broad stereotypes. Let's just lean into them to tell what I mean.
Like so you have to get like the main female character Cynthia, not to give short shrift. Like she is a very fun character. and kind of comes to realization like, oh, the guy I'm dating is a jerk, and then kind of just abandons that. I mean, it does kind of become like the male fantasy of, oh, the attractive popular girl is gonna dump her douche bro for me, a normal guy. Like you said, it's more tongue in cheek. It's not like it's not an aspirational movie like, oh, because like a lot of those 80 movies were just the normal guy trying to get the girl, and this did that, but it was in the context of such like a schlocky kind of 50s throwback B movie.
I mean, it was all to get to the end of the film with them in their prom or their, you know, in their like dance attire with a flamethrower and shotgun, which is like, you know, I'm fine whatever they do to lead up to that, because that like the culmination of this film is great.
And like the one moment of kind of grounded nature to the movie is when JC dies off screen.
Actually,
it was kind of like a weird, because he's in the bathroom and he starts hearing like the slugs going through.
Well, you see the janitor from earlier in the movie that was making fun of him.
His head blows up
because the cop, like Tom Atkins, finds him because the janitor said they were in there messing with the body, and he, you know, he's like making fun of him. Well, then the guy we talked about that's all in the movies comes. Actually, one of the best scenes in the movie is when they're doing the autopsy of the lab worker, and then he just gets up and walks off, and he's like naked with his neck cut and blood going down.
And the people aren't even paying attention.
And then the cop's like, "I'll see you later, man." And he's walking through. Like, that was such a good like little scene. And then, you know, he gets the janitor. Well, then when JC's in the bathroom, the janitor walks in there and falls, and his head blows up, and all the slugs run over the place.
Yeah, and then he even like lights a book of matches and it burns one. So you see that burning them will destroy them. And it's like, okay, well, how's he going to get out of this? And they don't really show it. And then later you see his body laying down there next to dissolved slugs.
Well, he leaves a tape recording, which was, I think, really effective because he was the one that had the more personality of the two.
Yeah,
so like that was effective. Like, oh, okay, that's sad that he died, but he did figure it out. But then you go in there. To me, it felt like almost more like a video game or something, where you go in like a character you like, you just find dead off screen. It's like that was effective. And
it did feel like a little bit of a cheap moment because they didn't want to lose the audience by showing like one of your lead characters getting killed in the way you don't like.
Yeah.
And I thought like there'd be some sort of twist at some point where he was still alive, and if they killed the majority of him, but no, he was dead.
I think that worked out though, because if they hadn't come back, and then, you know, I think that worked. Pacing in the movie worked pretty well. But actually, I think my favorite batshit moment of this movie is Tom Atkins. At one point, after he gets the girl he was in love with dies from the axe murder, he decides every night that him and his 12 gauge are going to go find the serial killer. So he shoots the serial killer in the chest and kills him. But then for whatever reason, he buries him at the sorority house, of which the girl he lived at. And then several years later, they build the master, or whatever you want to call the woman, like the head of the house, like her house or cabin's built on top where the guy he buried is.
Yeah.
So they didn't find him through construction. But anyway, somehow a slug reanimates the body of the axe murderer, who then comes out of the grave, and he buried him with an axe. And then he axes that one woman to death. And then, because like the Tom Atkins part was he didn't believe in the space slugs. He just thought that the guy he thought he killed really wasn't dead.
Yeah.
So then they're like chasing around this zombified axe murderer. And actually, where I kind of thought that Slither pulled directly from this, and it's slightly different, is all the cops are there where they find the zombified axe murderer, and they shoot it, and all the slugs bust out. So I was assuming, based on Slither, like all of them were going to the Cosmo house. The exception like Tom Atkins, and they didn't do that. But that was definitely pulled from this for Slither, because it was like an exact similar moment.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, so you have the moments too of like once they're starting to figure out what's going on, and you see like the slugs like managing to get to different people, because there's like the bus of like the frat brothers, and then was it the driver crashes, and
he crashes into like some type of tow truck,
and then the slugs get all of them.
Well, actually, the dog is infected from the woman that had run the sorority.
Yeah, and then that does allow for later Tom Atkins to have like the classic line. It's like, well, girls got good news and bad news. Like your dates are here, but they're dead.
Yeah. Actually, like I just think too, one of the moments that was pretty good is like Tom Atkins' character is going to kill himself. Because he's like sitting in the house drinking bourbon or whatever, and he's like just trying to go. And then the main character is like beating on the door. So then you kind of realize like he runs and pulls the duct tape off the door, and then you realize like he was just gonna blow himself up because he just, I guess.
And then he has to hold it off for later and give it some purpose.
Yeah. Which I thought that was another cliche.
Like a dark humor thing.
Yeah, because he was about to like the thing, and then he didn't.
Yeah, so you have like these kind of like subversions of expectations a little bit, because like when you think back, there's always been movies that kind of were, satires of the genre they were in, because even like Jason Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives was kind of like a parody of those films almost, while being a straightforward entry in that genre. And this movie from that, same era, same few years from 86, this movie was one that was kind of a parody of the like splatter sci-fi horror movies from the 80s.
Well, from the 50s too.
In the 50s, because
Night of the Creeps.
Night of the Creeps, and then you think back to like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like all this stuff where aliens, because aliens were more of a fear in the 50s.
Yeah,
I guess that was just like an external version of like our fear over like the Russians or the Cold War.
Because when they got here with Roswell.
Yeah, so you have all this stuff like that. And in the 80s, there's like a little bit of nostalgia for that, because like the Blob was another one that
Have you guys seen Night of the Comet?
Yes.
It's another Night of film.
Yeah.
Have you seen that one?
It's been a while.
I can't remember.
I've got a copy of that.
There's just so much I love about this movie. And like Derek, isn't that his name? Isn't that the douchey boyfriend's name?
Probably.
Something like that. Anyway, like he's walking along and he sees like a slug go into the bush. And then the dog walks by, and then that's how he gets infected, through the dog. So, he goes to pick up the Cynthia. And he's like obviously zombified, and he's like terrible looking. And they're like, "Oh, that's really funny, huh?" And they go get her, and then she's like sitting there holding his hand, and he's just dispensing slugs out. And she doesn't know it. Well, then Tom Atkins and the other guy show up, and they tell her, so she realizes. And they shoot him in the head, and his head explodes, and they burn him to death. And it's like that is so ridiculous, Like that was just such a good scene.
Well, and two, you missed the cameo before that. Oh my God. Dick Miller cameo.
When he's
where he gets the flamethrower from.
He's the guy that runs the arms room for the police, and he's saying, "Okay, explain how the flamethrower works." Like, well, I need the requisition form. He's like, "Well, there isn't a form." And he like pulls a shotgun on him. So you get your fun Dick Miller cameo, because he was in everything back then.
He was one of those another familiar faces.
I would have taken a sequel to this with Dick Miller as the lead, as him taking over. I would have absolutely loved it.
Because he was also the gun store owner in the Terminator.
Yeah.
And then in Gremlins, obviously. So, just fun, like, people popping up. And it is interesting to see, like, even back in the 80s, they had an idea of kind of like, oh, like, here's somebody that's been in these other things, so we went in ours.
Yeah.
And now that's kind of gone overboard with people like saying, oh, this, we want only this movie to be populated with people that were from other things. Yeah. But, with this one
came off a lot more organic, and maybe too because it wasn't done at nauseum, but it just felt organic. It like made sense.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was probably unique for the time, in that if you just watch a trailer, it's like, oh, it's kind of a schlocky B movie throwback. Yeah. Which it was, but it had more like satirical.
Yeah, but I wonder
elements.
too if the lack of success was now, we understand it. We get that genre of film. Back then, were people just so thrown like, wait, why would they do this? You know what I mean? Like now it is, those types of films are like celebrated and lauded, and they're like, oh, we appreciate them for what they were. Back then, I'm sure many audiences were like, no, they're trash. You know what I mean? They saw no other value. Well, I mean, now we love that, and the celebration of those films and what is good about them, even if they're not all good. Like the entire movies aren't good. There are elements we like, and this was like a celebration of that.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is you have the differences in culture, because back in the 80s, I mean, you had like some of the magazines and stuff like that. But the convention scene wasn't really what it is today. If I don't know, because obviously I wasn't alive in the 80s, but like,
I mean, you were just very young.
Like in the 80s, I was not old enough to go to any.
I mean, they had definitely horror conventions, but they weren't.
They weren't what they are.
They weren't $150 or $200 for a week. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't as popular,
and there wasn't as much information shared with everybody. So something like Night of the Creeps, even like Evil Dead 2, something that was kind of like a cult status movie. It required a very specific audience to enjoy it, and you had to reach them in a specific way, but it wasn't a crossover movie. But I think people now are a lot more open to genres crossing, and there are a lot more venues for people to come across the content they like. Because back then, if you saw an ad, because this is even with modern day stuff, companies still struggle with, if I have like a horror comedy, do I make it look like a comedy or make it look like a horror movie? Whichever way I do it is going to piss off some of the fans. But if I market it as a straightforward horror movie, I'll make more money than if I market it as a comedy.
Yeah.
So that conundrum still exists today, and that's what those are things I think do a lot better on streaming platforms, because I think like Tucker and Dale vs. Evil has done way better on Netflix than it ever did on theatrical and DVD release, just because it's out there, it's easy to watch, and people can enjoy it. So like this movie, Night of the Creeps, is one that if you were to release that movie today, like modern effects and all that stuff, I think that it would have at least more of an impact on the popular consciousness than it did in the 80s. But like it grew over time, and when I was at Horror Hound and they gave Tom Atkins like the Lifetime Achievement Award or whatever their version of that was called, like they had clips from this movie in there. When they had like a little pre-roll video they showed and some other movies. So like it is something people remember and something that sticks around.
Well, it's something I've always like seen. I've probably seen it before, like bits and pieces of it, but I'd never watched it on one sitting.
Yeah.
And it's one of those movies like, it just like, I really liked it. Like it's up there with me as far as like Evil Dead 2 and stuff, just because like it's so ridiculous. And I think a lot of it is because Tom Atkins is so great. And like, I don't know if you had somebody else in there, if it would have been as effective, or if they even remade it today, like who even fits that type of bill that he does, like a cop guy, a guy that plays a bunch of like, I don't know who you'd even get to do that.
I mean, like it's because he had this very specific look, like his mustache and his haircut, like put him in a trench coat and like a button-down shirt, the tie, and he looks like a detective. I mean, that's just what he looks like. Because he was in like Maniac Cop, he was in like this, he was in Lethal Weapon, Halloween. Halloween 3 and The Fog were a little bit different because in those he was actually like hooking up with women and playing a little bit of different type.
A little more suave than he was.
And
he was in a white tuxedo on the beach. How much more suave can you get?
That's pretty suave. that would, but I just really enjoyed it because like it's just so ridiculous and over the top, and like a lot of these movies, like when they get into that, they almost take it too serious. But
they go too far goofy. You know what I mean? Well, it turns into a scary movie.
This even had a part where they get like Cynthia and the main guy like lock themselves into a garden shed, and the zombies are breaking in. At one point, he turns a lawnmower on and mows one of them up.
Yeah.
So that kind of reminds me of
Brain Dead.
Yeah.
Or Dead Alive.
Yeah, that part. So there's a lot of stuff in this movie that I wonder if like people pulled stuff from it, because there's like I really love too, and it almost Mad Max-ish, because when they wreck the bus with all the guys in it, the bus driver's eyes like pop out of his head, which reminds me of Mad Max.
Yeah, George Miller's done that.
In multiple movies. Yeah. So I wonder if they, kind of did that a little bit, because that to me was that entire scene was very Mad Max-ish.
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those movies where you can see where people took inspiration from it. And like he said, it goes funny without going so far it completely loses any grounding whatsoever, and is just like no. Because I was trying to think of like modern day movies that like try to go for that tone. Like we said, Slither. Yeah. And I almost think that Planet Terror, the Robert Rodriguez movie, kind of went for a tone like that, like kind of goofy, over the top stuff.
I think so, for sure.
While still having some level of grounding to it.
I mean, this one had some level, but it was like, when you have like the axe murder element to it, and you have like the aliens that they had at the very beginning, like it just sets that apart, because like a lot of because like with Slither, you never really knew what it was, it was just like, but this one's like, oh, it was an experiment, and they,
this really could have been like if they would have made an 80s version of Grindhouse. This could have been one of those films, and it would have been
fit.
Because I think too, this is more of what people's ideas sometimes of grindhouse thing, or like. Because there's like there was a huge trend of like faux exploitation films, and it was one of those things that's really funny because I don't think mainstream audiences ever really bought into that, but indie filmmakers really did. So a lot of stuff had that kind of.
Tony Wash's making one now, or you made one? Did you see the one Tony Wash just made? It has Sid Haig in it.
Yeah, I've seen the trailer.
What is that?
High on the Hog.
Yeah, High on the Hog.
I'm not even really talking about that, but like ones where people very specifically did, because like Grindhouse came out, like the Tarantino Rodriguez movie, and didn't really make much money. Yeah. And then everybody really loved that style and aped that style of the fake Grindhouse movie with the film scratches and the film breaks and the film burns and all that stuff.
His trailer is straight up that. The whole thing,
And then the thing that like was interesting to me is like, but that movie didn't do well. Like, so it wasn't like they were emulating Star Wars or something that was like a big hit.
I guess it's just emulating love. They loved it, so they want to make it. So they don't care what it does.
A lot of people liked those films themselves, or I think a lot of people like the idea of what it was,
but I think
not what it actually was.
And I think that's fine. I think you can make it what you want. Like if people keep making those films and making some that are beloved, you know what I mean? Then you will foster a new sort of like second wave faux grindhouse era. You know what I mean? Like you can make that a thing now where it's like, oh, I like these films, just like spaghetti westerns was like westerns died out. Well, now the Italians are making their own thing. This is like now indie filmmakers are making this new genre.
like,
I just think the issue with a lot of stuff though is like this movie was not mean spirited at all. But I think a lot of the people who remake these movies kind of take a mean-spirited angle at it, and then it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
Because, like, as ridiculous as the movie is, you're shooting people in the head with a shotgun and then burning space slugs and they jump out of their head.
Yeah,
like,
it's a good time.
It's a good time. It's fun. Like, when Tom Atkins comes in, there's all these, like, co-eds in there, and they're, like, they're barely dressed. Their boobs are out. They're in lingerie, and he just got a gun. They're not even freaking out.
Yeah,
because like there's a scene where like they zoom up when he's looking out the window, and they zoom up, and he's like the good, the good news is blah blah. Like that's good, perfect.
And that scene plays way differently in the '86 than it does today. Because you look at a lot of movies where they have anything to do with like schools or colleges or anything with like firearms and stuff that today wouldn't be funny at all and wouldn't play. Before that was even a worry that people really had. Because
there's an older white male with a shotgun.
Yeah, so that would play a lot differently.
But going decades before, even Columbine, it was a time where I think with a lot of horror stuff, it was a more. So there was always terrible.
Before
there were always terrible things going on in the world.
But I guess
it wasn't as oversaturated, and there wasn't as much fear for the United States of it being at your doorstep or places you go.
I guess the one thing you could write up too is since it's a small knit community for college stuff, they maybe already knew who he was.
Well, I mean, because there was that one movie, Final Exam or something. It was like a '80s slasher set at a college, and they even like had a prank with like assault rifles and stuff that the cops didn't even care about.
Yeah.
It's like that plays way differently today. But this movie, at least he was like a cop and he looked like a cop when he went there.
But actually, okay.
I was say, but like back to my earlier point, like this is what I think a lot of people think of when they think of Grindhouse movies, like these kind of fun, over the top movie with cheesy elements. But this wasn't a Grindhouse movie at all. It was just like a fun throwback.
This was replicating. You know what I mean?
50s.
Yeah, this was
drive-in movies.
Yeah, like this, which was Grindhouses sometimes drive-in movies. Like this was replicating that kind of the tone of I don't want to say the tone what they were going for, but how some of those films came off. You know what I mean? Like just very cheesy catchphrases and stuff.
Oh, this one's like full of them. And then like at one point, he says Miller time when he shoots one of the guys.
Yeah, who was that? I forgot.
That was Tom Atkins.
No, but like who did he shoot?
It was like
one of the boys.
It was one of the
kids?
It was one of the douchey frat guys.
Yeah,
but I can't.
Miller time.
I think it was like the one that had the unibrow or whatever. It's Miller time. And it's like what doesn't make any sense at all. Because there's nothing in the room that says Miller like.
Yeah, and I wonder if that was like a callback that they cut out there earlier. You know what I mean? Like they cut out
because like me, and Courtney were watching that.
Maybe he runs into him somewhere earlier in the film, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's buying some beer.
I just love that. Like he's like, it's Miller time. It's like, oh, but actually, I think my favorite scene in the entire movie is it's when he is in the room with the girl that has the cat. We kind of gloss over the cat scene.
Oh yeah, the jump scare cat.
Yeah, the jump scare cat, which was funny. But then, like, she gets grabbed by one of the things and, like, runs over in the corner and looks like she's praying. So he's, like, trying to grab her, and then she's apparently infected. So she's, like, on top of him, and then they're all fighting. And then he, like, looks up, and he sees his high school sweetheart. And he gets up, he's like, ah! And he's, like, shooting everything and is spinning around.
That's a great shot where it's, like, they have him, like... on something spinning with the camera.
It looks crazy.
Again, this film's shot very well. I think it has some great shots in it.
Yeah, that was so fun.
Some great camera moves and stuff. Like there's, stuff that's kind of hidden unless you're looking for it. It just, I don't know. I love the way this film is directed.
Actually, I think another good part, which I just love this movie. Everything. I'm like William with Troll 2. Well, this part's good. But is when he's talking to the main guy and he's like
Troll 2.
Yeah, I'm not saying Troll.
That's a pinnacle of cinema.
To clarify, I had people over, was drinking and was just trying to convince him to keep watching.
And he's like, this is the best part. This is the best part, and it's like every single. But anyway, he's talking to the main guy and he's like, where's your high school sweetheart? Well, I had to pick mine up off the road. And he goes through the entire spiel. And he's like, what's the point? And he's like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. And it's like, it didn't make any sense. And he's giving an underage kid alcohol.
Yeah.
So
like it's good. It's
yeah,
really enjoyable.
yeah. I mean, it's just like Fred Decker's career. He also after this did the Monster Squad. So 2 movies are like cult favorites. And the Monster Squad, I think, had more of like a footprint in pop culture, just because it had like classic monsters in it.
And it was a kids' film. A lot of people.
Yeah. Wolfman's got nards.
Aren't they remaking that?
It's supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been remaking that for forever. But like Night of the Creeps is like a decidedly different feel than I don't know. Monster Squad and Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps could make a good double bill.
Yeah.
With Monster Squad being a little bit lighter
but there's some not kid friendly stuff like in Night of the Creeps.
Really,
like you have some boob shots.
Yeah.
Which is just your gratuitous 1980s.
Let's help sell it with these.
Well, it just kind of felt like something out of Animal House or a movie like that because it shows like all the women taking showers and they pan through all of them. So it's like that's very much like your typical 80s college movie, like Porky's, pick whatever one you want. But then you do have some pretty intense violence, I guess, at the end because they are shooting people in the head and blowing them up and doing all this ridiculous stuff. And I guess to get to the ending, the brains that were in the case, they like realize like, oh, there's all these brains in the basement. Yeah. So that's where all the slugs are at. And they go down there with the flamethrower. And Tom Atkins is down there with tape over his mouth, like pouring gas all over everything.
Yeah, so they can't get in his mouth.
Yeah, and you look over in the corner, and then there's a huge amount of slugs.
I mean, like, you kind of know what's going on, but I love that shot where they go down the basement, and all of a sudden they turn the flashlight, and it's almost creepy. It's almost like the end of Blair Witch. Like, you're like, what am I looking at? Because he's sitting there with duct tape over his mouth. You're like, wait. It takes you a second to register, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, that's why he has tape on his mouth. You know what I mean? Like I love that shot, and like he's like, get out, like immediately.
Yeah. And he has to take tape off.
Yeah.
And then it's funny because like he's sitting there counting down, and like he's about to light the match, and he's like slugs are going all over him, and they
there's like the ones that shoot out just as it blows up.
Yeah. And now we were talking about this pre-podcast, but there's 2 endings in this movie. Now we all watch the same ending, so maybe all the ones you get now all have this ending. But at the end, like the fire department shows up, the house is exploded, and it's kind of like
seemingly happy ending.
Everything's kind of happy, and then you cut to like Tom Atkins is walking down the street smoking a cigarette, and he's all burnt up, and then like, he falls and you hear his head blow up, and then 3 slugs go out, and then they go into a cemetery, and then you see the alien spaceship from the very beginning show up, and they have a searchlight looking for him.
Yeah,
and that's the ending we all saw. Now, the original ending is there is, I think, the Cynthia, and everything's done, the dog that caused the bus wreck comes back, and she goes to pet it, and a slug jumps at her, and it cuts. So it kind of implies that, she gets infected or whatever. So, I mean, I think the ending was fine. It kind of fit the tone of the film. Like, of course, like you really wouldn't want Tom Atkins' character to die, but he was essentially dead anyway.
He was suicidal. And
yeah. So, I mean, I think it all worked out. And I think it was a fun movie. I just really enjoyed it, And I look at something like Slither, which I think like Slither was obviously very similar to this, but it was one of those movies like I enjoy it, but I think something like this is just way more fun.
Well, and two, you have the difference of mid-2000s CGI versus 80s practical effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the practical effects in that, and like in Night of the Creeps, hold up pretty well. There's nothing really that kind of sits there and makes you go, oh boy. I mean, like some of the opening stuff with the aliens is a little bit janky.
That's intentional.
But it gets across the point. It's like people in suits.
This also feels like a good double bill with Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking about that, and that's what I would kind of compare my experience of viewing this with the most, is because like that was a movie that I didn't really have much like, oh, okay, we're going to cover it, and I was the one that brought up I think Night of the Creeps because I just saw something.
Yeah, I watched it probably a couple years ago and loved it, so I was like, yeah, I'm on board.
And I'm like, but it's, and I watched it, it's like, I'm thinking, and I had a really good time watching it, and it was something that like. Because a lot of times, like, I think we all fall in the same thing. We're like, we'll have, our significant others watch stuff with us, and sometimes they check out, and sometimes they don't, and like Courtney, some of the stuff I make her watch is just like so far out there. Like Mandy, that's a hard sell on a lot of people. But like,
if you're not in on that in the first 15 minutes, you're probably not turning around on it.
But like this just starts off like so much shit happens in the first 15 minutes that takes the entire movie to set up and work out.
Yeah.
Which in a lot of 80s movies, that doesn't happen. Because there's a lot of times there's like a lull. So this goes from being like B horror movie in the beginning to very stereotypical 80s college comedy. Insert, like I said, anything. Animal House, Porky's, Revenge of the Nerds. any of that stuff, and then it goes back to being the horror stuff. So you don't really get that in a lot of movies,
and it doesn't have much downtime.
No,
it
there's not
pretty
much,
briskly.
and the stuff that isn't horror related again fits right in with any period comedy that is out there.
Yeah.
So that stuff is at least entertaining too, you know. So it's one of those weird 80 movies where, like, a lot of times with your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th, your Nightmare on Elm Streets, any movie in the 80s, 90s, whatever, you do have a boring point. Whereas this one, since it was a comedy, it just played like a traditional comedy for a large part of it. You know?
Yeah, so I guess we've probably talked about enough stuff. We can kind of give what our opinions and scores on it would be. So, Derek, what would you give it out of 10?
I mean, I really loved it. It's not a 10 out of 10, but it's 8 out of 10. I highly recommend it. It's great. Like, Tom Atkins is awesome in it because he's seen choosing a good way. Like, he wanted to be there. He seemed like he's having fun doing it. It wasn't like,
a paycheck movie.
Yeah, it wasn't a paycheck movie. It felt like, something he could go and have fun with and just kind of go out there and do something he probably didn't usually get to do.
Yeah.
So I think that you could tell that a lot of people had enjoyed. This seemed like a movie they enjoyed to make, because like everybody got to be like a ridiculous version of themselves for the most part, and the pacing for 80s movies is great, because a lot of times
that's what I was thinking too. Like, it's not as fast paced as even like some stuff. You think of like the most fast paced stuff, like You're Right film, where it's like everything gets faster over time. But like for an 80s film, man, this had to have been like lightning speed for a lot of stuff.
And whenever there's not horror related stuff happening, it feels like something at Animal House, because you have like the stunt, where like they kill the horse in Animal House or something. But this one they put a dead body out. And one scene we didn't talk about is when the dead body goes back to the guy from the 50s, goes back to the sorority house, and he pushes his head against the glass.
And it blows up.
And that was a really good scene. Yeah. That was like really effective, and still I think today holds up.
I guess he's just going back to where his date was supposed to be.
Yeah, but it just, and the way it looked was really well. But I really loved it. 8 out of 10. I highly recommend it. Like I said, if you watch it and you listen to this podcast, you still can enjoy it when you rewatch stuff because it's so over the top.
Yeah, like I was even thinking 8 before you said anything, because it's it's not like my all time favorites. It's a fun movie, and it's something that I definitely think is worth a rewatch if you haven't watched it in a while, because it is just kind of goofy fun. And there's a lot in it. Like, you can see where modern things have similarities, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff from the 50s it pulled from. But just a fun movie throughout. It's like a lot of people, when they think of like kind of making these like throwback movies, like this is kind of what
they want
it should be, versus where you just take like a movie and have like two elements and try to sell it on, and it's like, well, no, this was like through and through, like you said, like 50s like alien body invasion type movie,
and also urban legend
mixed with like the urban legend killer thing, mental institution, mixed with the 80s raunchy college comedy, mixed with sci-fi horror,
revenge cop, so you got so many things going on, and they kind of blended it perfectly. And I think this is a movie that I don't think they'll ever do a straight remake of it, but I don't think you could even do it, because everything seemed to go together just right. And to me, I think a big part of it was Tom Atkins. I just think he was just really enjoyable in it.
So
I will also 8 out of 10. I think I'd reviewed it on Letterboxd, give it a 4 out of 5. You know what I mean? Like but yeah, 8 out of 10 for me too. I like this film a whole lot. I would, I'd be interested to see an attempt to remake. I mean, again, Nick Cage as Tom Atkins
would be great.
Instead of a 50s flashback, it's an 80s flashback. You know, with the 80s vibe. Shoot it like an 80s film, because that's that was black and white. And then you could do stuff where he runs with a gun on campus and everybody flips out. You know what I mean? Like, I think you could. It would be interesting to see them, but also make it updated. You know what I mean? Like, make it of its time, because this film was of its time. You know what I mean? It was seeped in those, like you said, those 80s college movies and stuff. Like, it was just they made one of those films. It knew what they were doing. It wasn't something fresh, but it was all putting all these elements together that made it fresh. You know what I mean? Like, you can 8 out of 10, like, so many great moments, and moment to moment, there's so much good stuff in this film.
Yeah.
Yep. So that wrap up our discussion of Night of the Creeps. If you're listening via iTunes, do us a huge favor and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast. We always enjoy seeing feedback wherever we can. You can also email us at podcast@houseofvideostore.com if you want. You can find all the stuff we're doing at houseofvideostore.com. Find links to all of our social media accounts, to Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all that good stuff. But definitely make sure to follow us on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, and because that's where we post all the stuff to and all the updates and we're going to be reviewing on the podcast and different things we have going on. And you can find all that stuff there. And if you want to find us specifically on the internet, you can find me on Instagram at the William Caps.
Find me at MetalWorldDirt.
And I'm at Blevin Sean on Twitter.
And that will wrap up this episode of the House by Sword podcast. Thanks for listening.
House by the